This is Mark Spencer, Spencer's Apiaries. I'm going to be going over this mountain camp method of feeding as we prep for winter. This is me at one of my apiaries, and what I'm currently doing is just getting ready to be putting dry sugar on top of the hives. In the fall, heading into fall, late summer, we start feeding with sugar syrup, 1:1 or 2:1. But once it gets too cold in the winters and the nights become consistently below 50 degrees, we really shouldn't be doing liquid feed anymore, and so we move to dry feed. This method has a few advantages, one of which is time. It's just easy. It takes very little prep, very little supplies. So we have this rim that I'm picking up now, and that's about, it doesn't really matter too much how wide you make that. That's about, I think that one's like a 3/4 1 inch. And so that just raises the lid, which allows us to apply the sugar. Now, normally we put this onto newspaper that will be placed over the frames, but in this case, when I open up the hive, and it is pretty cold out today, it's about 40 degrees, a little bit below 30, or a little bit below 40, sorry. And so I don't want to disturb the bees too much. So there was a big cluster of bees underneath the inner cover. If I lift that up, I'm going to get a lot of bees in the air. I'm going to lose some bees. It's going to disrupt the cluster too much. So what I do in this case is I just go ahead and put the sugar right on top of the inner cover, put the shim, and then the cover. Now I will be coming back. I do have insulation that I'm going to place under these outer covers as well. But what this will do is it'll still allow the moisture to come up through that center opening and collect into the sugar, and it gives them another source of food. I have tested it. It does work pretty well this way. So on this one, what we're going to see is that I will be able to remove that inner cover. You won't see many bees, but yes, they are down in there. All of these hives are live and doing well this fall. So I just take the inner cover off because I don't see a big cluster of bees. Shake any loose ones, and there's some bees. You can see the feeder that I'm using off to the side there as well. And I'll grab some newspaper, and I place the paper on. There's different methods of doing it. This is just I am doing this fall. And I change it from year to year as time goes on. It can be kind of frustrating when you get the wind going and that. I clipped out some things where I was wrestling and I had papers blow off just to try to shorten it up a little bit. We take that inner cover. The longer that's open, the more upset the bees get. So we just want to move purposefully and quickly as we can. You see that wind giving me a little bit of trouble. The shim will kind of hold it in place. That placed down, get it positioned. I used to try to cover the whole top. I don't anymore because it takes a little bit of time sometimes for those bees to chew through the paper. So in this case, I put a little bit of sugar on it to keep from blowing. You can spray it down with a little bit of water if you want. The sugar will absorb the water. It'll start to harden up the sugar a little more quickly. I do sometimes, I don't sometimes. I don't know that it really helps. I leave gaps along the edges most of the time, or I'll create a hole the bees can travel up through without having to go through the paper. I'll just take this. I want this to seal down a little bit, so I'll take some of that comb that's on the edges sometimes, and I'll scrape that off just to make it fit on top of that shim a little better. I want to let through as little air as possible. One of the things people do is they put ventilation on hives in the winter because they're afraid of too much moisture in there, but in this case we are not afraid of moisture. The moisture will go right into the sugar. Down the top. I just want to make sure that that's all square. And like I said, I will be putting insulation underneath that top just to help them out a little bit more. And that's it, and we place it down. So you can do this when it's kind of cold outside. It doesn't really matter. Another little hint though about the newspaper. People are concerned the bees will chew through it. They may. One of the times I did this early on, I actually did it really early. Earlier than I should have. It was too warm. The bees chewed through the paper and actually released the sugar and made a big mess. So that's why I'm doing this near the end of November now. We don't normally have that problem. The bees aren't going to really bother with the paper all that much, and it's going to be there to absorb that moisture. In this case, I had the same problem. The bees are underneath that inner cover. I don't want to disturb them. Beautiful cluster. So we put the shim on, we put the sugar on. I just want to smooth that out a little bit and cause a little disruption to these bees as we can going into winter. Don't want to mess up the cluster too much. And then we place that on the top. And that's really all there is to this. And the inner cover, like I said, isn't ideal. It doesn't manage the moisture as well, but it does a good job. I've tested it, and the bees go up there in the spring. You'll see them up there eating the sugar if they want the sugar. Now, will the bees eat the sugar? Some of the hives, the bees will eat the sugar. Other hives, the bees don't. You'll go up there and most of the sugar will be gone. Other bees will have barely touched it. At the end of the day, it's just insurance. Most of these hives have plenty of food. Some of these hives are over 100 pounds with honey in them. You don't necessarily need this. They place it on all the hives so that it can deal with some of the moisture. And even with the hives that are full of honey, I often find them in the spring, in the top, still going after that sugar. The bees will rise up through the boxes, and they'll get to the top quite often because they're moving with the heat. So I also don't want them going to the top and not finding any food there if they can't move because it's cold. In this case, literally the whole roof is full of food so that they can get to that. It's just insurance a lot of the time. You lose your hive tool? I seem to always lose my hive tool. I was dropping it, getting frustrated. So here's one of those examples where I kind of covered all the frames, but I didn't really want to make them go through the paper. So I'm doing this. Just going to tear a little hole so if any bees want to try to travel through, they can. I do have a friend, Justin, who has these shims, but he actually puts screen, like window screen, underneath the shim. Reason being is it'll support the sugar. The bees can, as the moisture gets to it, they can lick through the screen to get to the sugar. The biggest advantage being in the spring, the bees can actually, or the sugar, I'm sorry, can be just removed by picking up the screen. So in the spring, sometimes this can be very messy. It'll become hard chunks of sugar that you can lift off, put into a bucket. Yes, you can reliquefy it and use that for your spring feed. But it can be messy. It'll drop through the comb. And so that is kind of a pain when the spring comes. So he solves that by doing that. The bees can't get on top of it. He says it works very, very well. I haven't done it. I'm sure it does work very, very well. Would solve some of the mess. So you just got to add one step of when you make these frames to go ahead and put them underneath. You can make these frames or you can buy them. Most beekeeper supply companies do sell these shims. They do have some other purposes as well. So that's it. You really want to get in here. You want to move quickly and with purpose. Get this taken care of. You don't want to disturb these bees. It was a beautiful day. I was blessed. I just got back from a trip. I only had a few days before Thanksgiving. And the bad weather was coming through. I had to do all my apiaries in one day. And I did it well because the next day the temperatures dropped and we got snow, we got rain, we got all types of things. It would have been very difficult to do this. So we have another nice little cluster of bees up here. I did test the weight of many of these hives before I got started too. Like I said, most of them are very heavy. They would have probably been fine on food, but just making sure. We put the paper in, that time's nice and smooth. Now these edges that hang out of the paper, it's not a big deal. You can leave them if you want. I actually believe I came back the next day when I put those insulating covers on, and I did carefully remove those, but be careful if you go ahead and rip that and you got that sugar on the top. Let's say you put the top on and then you tear that paper on the side, you may tear a hole going through the paper, so just be very, very careful if you do that. Maybe better just leave it, whatever you're comfortable with. As far as the sugar, I use white granulated sugar. Please only use white granulated sugar. It's clean fuel for the bees. If you use, a lot of people want to use like organic raw sugar thinking it's better. That's not a good idea. There are indissolvable solids that are within that the bees would then consume, and it's hard on their digestion. Remember, they don't fly for like 3 months. Sometimes they got to hold this. And so if you do that, that can cause dysentery. It backs up, they got all this material that they got to deal with. That's about it. So now I'm just going to finish up the yards. I'm not going to, for this yard, I'm not going to bore you with all the details from here on out, but I'm just going to do these last few hives, and then I pack up, and I got some other yards to go to after this. This is just a good way to do some insurance for the hives. It's inexpensive, it's easy to do, requires very little special equipment, and the bees will thank you for it. and hopefully get a few more hives through the winter by doing so. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can leave questions in the comments, or you can contact me directly at mark@SpencerApiaries.com. Mark@SpencerApiaries.com. That's it. Have a great day.